Yeah, so uh, I really like that story you're telling with all these departments. What I do find out sometimes with my customers though is that they don't know always how their processes are really working. They understand they have purchase pay or IT or vendor management, but how is that process actually really constructed? Which are the people that are really working? Because sometimes it's crossing so many departments and so many areas in the country that they don't have a grip anymore what's going on because it sits in systems, and if you ask people, nobody can really reconstruct everything that happens because it evolved over time. Well, again, with the combination of process mining, I think we could help there. Let's dive into the application. So first of all, it's a web-based application, so it runs in a browser. It can run on-prem, so it doesn't need to go over the internet with data. I think that's a very important notice, especially for government. So let me very briefly go what you see on my screen. I loaded up some data from actually a bank in this case, where we look at purchase orders. So really looking at how invoices were processed. But it can, of course, be any process, and the visuals will be the same. As I mentioned before, that unique identifier that we have, that's what we call here a case. So every time somebody is, for instance, a ticket is created or an invoice is created, we call that a case. And we will follow that until it's from creation till it's really closed. And that's what we call a case. So in this data set, we look at 20,000, about 20,000 cases. Every time something happens with that case, an event happens. So something was approved, something was rejected, and more or less you can see here all the different events that took place. And the unique events is what we call an activity. So an activity is really the real separate step. So receiving an invoice, pay for invoice. But sometimes in one process, there can be multiple appointments, multiple receivements, requested data, etc. The first real number that already was discovered with our algorithm is that from those 20,000 cases, there were more than 290 ways this process was executed. So there are 290 ways the process goes from A to Z. Well, that already gives me a little bit of a number of efficiency. And then I had some extra data reloaded into the system, also related to the users. So what I'm about to show is just a template. The application is in that sense flexible, so you can really change almost anything you want. You can create your own dashboards, your own insights, slice and dice data in any way you want. But we provide you out-of-the-box templates for most all common processes, and we even have a template for an unknown process where analysts will always keep asking the same questions. Where is my bottleneck? Where is most of my time spent? How is my process working? What are my variations? So we really have that experience over the last couple of years and really brought that together to a very easy to use dashboard where everything that you see is interacting with each other. So just give you an example, if I just want to, for instance, see I have a time frame of data when everything happened, I could easily click on this, and then everything is more or less filtered, and I will see also all my cases here on top filtered. But of course, most interesting part, because this is what you see from BI as well, but we really look now on the process mining part. So the process that you see here, that map that I'm going to show, that is not something that we gave to the system or reconstructed or say what the relations are with the activities. Now that's really the process mining algorithm that does that for you. So first of all, let me enlarge the screen a little bit so it makes a little bit more sense. So what you see here is the same activities that happen most current in the process, but of course this is not the entire process. And underneath here you see actually two sliders. And what I did for the demo, I made the sliders all the way down. So what happens now is more or less I see the most common way this process from the receiving of an invoice to the paying of an invoice was executed. You also see on the numbers that from receiving of an invoice to processing invoice, that happens like more than 8,000 times. In this data set, and let me actually filter the data away so I have that 20,000 cases again. You see that those receiving of invoice to processing invoice took 90,000 times, but then not all those cases go from processing invoice to final check of invoice. That's only 17,000. Well, that's because there's a lot of different ways this process is executed as well. And what I can do now with this slider is for us add those activities that are also in this process, but not happen that often or as frequently as the other ones. And I can really slide the slider away and really see all more or less the exceptions that take place. So for instance, I can see here that in this part of the process, 20 times a certain activity was taking place from receiving to invalid credit not access to processing invoice. Well, this already gives me a little bit of information that there are process variations where there are different steps taken in the system. If I then make this a little bit smaller, I can grab a lot of extra information next to it. For instance, over timing, but also which people are involved. And if I would, just a very good example, if I would very quickly want to see, okay, who's actually executing this activity most of the time, I could just easily click on this, and then my process is filtered on only those 20 where my credit does not exist showed up, and I see actually immediately the users that are pointed to the process also filtered. Of course, I could look in many different ways. I'm really looking now more or less from the numbers perspective that says how many times a certain activity was executed. I can also drag the other slider underneath, which will give me more or less the connection speed between the two. And that's where I can spot very quickly things that I would not like to have, for instance, in my process. So for instance, I see here a loophole immediately from a final check of invoice and a payment of an invoice without an approval. Well, if I was an auditor and I saw that, and I would want to know why is that step not taken, I could easily then again filter on this arc where I now grabbed all the processes where no approvals were done. And actually I see here approval in invoice as well. Let me remove that as well. So I don't want to have that activity. And I filtered now from 20,000 cases very quickly 2,000 cases that have no approval steps in there. That already gives me an insight, okay, where from an auditor point of view, okay, let's go deeper. Which are the people that are involved with this, which are the amounts, for instance, etc. But let me now jump more or less to not a number point of view, but more a timing point of view, because that will also give you a little bit of insight. Where can I start with my RPA journey, for instance? So if I really put the sliders back again, I see my ideal process again. And let me now really go back, for instance, to a specific time. Let's say I'm really interested in June 2000, no, let's say September 2019. 1 second. Then I'm actually March 2019. What I see here now in my process, I have my receive invoice and my process invoice. And now based on the color, I can already see from the timing perspective that most of my time is really spent from receiving of an invoice to processing invoice. It takes an average in 8 days. So this already gives me an insight where to look at if I want to do an optimization of my process, because if the total throughput time for my process is important, that 8 days is a big jump to do. Of course, I could take the slider away and I can see actually all the timings where I can see all the averages, how long it takes in March 2019 to make a certain step from one to the other. What I could also do is more or less remove here everything. What I can see now is my total throughput time of my entire process takes 16 days to execute. That already tells me, okay, I'm now on 16 days. And what you can see here underneath, if you can see it very clearly, there's a different bar behind it. That will also give me the difference. So if I'm jumping actually from May to April, for instance, you can see that the throughput time went a little bit back. So what we actually did with this customer, we had that processing invoice captured, and we actually deployed robots on top. So this customer, of course, wanted to see what happened over time. So what you can see, this was May 2019. If you now actually see what we did between May 2019, where it took 9 days to execute this processing invoice, and we jumped to June 2019, you see that it went down from 9 days to actually 2.8 days, which of course was a huge improvement for that activity only. And of course, I could also look at the activity separately, what the automation rate was. But what I also see is that not the same time that I saved here was saved on the entire process, because that's still 14 days in comparison to 70 days. So I made an improvement, but that was not all. And if I let me jump back very quickly to the other one, you see that this one is very blue because that was one taking too long. But look at that color where it really jumps. I can see now that 1 month later, looking at the same data again, that actually the new bottleneck was created on financial check of invoice. Although this process was automated here, a new bottleneck popped up. And now this took 9 days to execute because these people really got a payload of work to do, which they didn't get in the beginning because they were more or less relying on the performance of their people. What you can also do is really make a quickly return on investment calculation, because I know which people are really involved in these activities because I loaded up in that system as well. I know sort of the average salaries of these people, and I know how much time they really spend behind the screen on executing these tasks. So if I calculate it in combination with the time, I can really do a cost-based analysis. And I could do that from an activity point of view, really showing how does a certain activity, what does it cost me? So I see that the final check of the invoice now cost me $46 in total to execute. I can do that entire case basis. So what does this process really cost me? And again, if I then look from May 2019, it cost me $108 in average to execute one case. And I look at June, now it's only costing me $57 to execute an overtime. So this gives you a very quickly, a return on investment and an investment. Where can I make improvements? And if you did the improvements, what is the effect from a time perspective, but even from a dollar perspective, if you want to. So, and I showed here already the activities. I do this in a money point of view. What, of course, is the advantage, again, as my colleague said, this is a tool that really works separately from RPA. But if you use our RPA bots, you can use that data from those bots as well to tie into the process, which is, of course, an advantage. You could do that manually as well if you have another competitor, but this makes it a little bit smoother. And what you then can do as well is more or less monitor over time what your activity automation rate is. So really seeing what I showed just in another dashboard, seeing, hey, I now actually 100% of my cases are now actually executed and automated with robots in this system. So I have a lot of things that I can still improve. And of course, what we did in this set for this customer, over time, we went from one department to another, making bigger improvements over time, where you can really see the improvements and the number of percentages that we automated this process, making the process more fluid, making it less error prone, because of course bots make less mistakes than people do. It's just a fact. And really scaling up the process in that way. And these people were not laid off or something that they didn't have to do. No, they were able to do other tasks next to it, and they really focus on the knowledge work that they were to do. So the effect that we always see with process mining, in the beginning, you will have a sort of big brother feeling, like I can really see what's really going on in my process, and I can see all the interactions and actually which people are involved, because I'm now really looking from a user perspective, but I could easily go from a social networking point of view, really seeing how is my data flowing through my organization. And I'm now having a visualization on country, for instance. Every ball here represents a unique case that went through my organization. So I can really see that as a big brother. But once we actually engage with workforce, they are so happy, because most of the time they know where their bottlenecks are, they know where their problems are, but they don't have the facts. And this system will give you really the facts. Where is my errors? Where is my bottlenecks? And people always say, hey, I told you before, my management didn't want to listen, and now I have proof to do it, and now they can make a business case to really improve on this. So how this is really adopted, that's one of my greatest achievements, I think, if I work with customers, is that they really are engaged with this, and once they see the benefit, everyone wants to jump on it, because every department then wants to see what's really going on. And again, visualizing this, what I'm now actually doing is I'm visualizing over time all the different activities. So that the cases that took a long time are the ones that really are moving slowly. But this gives me also the opportunity to really dive into those in depth. So if I see one that's going very slowly, I could just easily click on it, and I will have a drill down in every small detail what really happened. In this case, a scan bot did something. In this case, a user requested some data. For instance, another user did check some contact conditions, and then it actually laid there in a waiting queue for a very long time, and then it was executed by a bot in almost 0 seconds, and then again it was approved by this person within 4 hours. So it really gives me a very quick tear down from a very high overview, if I look from the process point of view, where I can really go very quickly, very deep in all the specific cases. So it's really bringing more the holistic view of things together. All right, that's from that point of view. Another really unique capability is tracking over time, and that's what I really said with that continuous improvement. if you find an anomaly or you want to track something over time, you want to make sure that you don't have to filter and click on all these things every time if you see something. And for a lot of known process, we deliver this out of the box, but these are able to be brought in by any user as well. It's a feature that we call tagging. What we can really do is lay business rules or KPIs or SLAs or whatever they are called on top of this process map. And what we can do with that is more or less say to the system, if you see some activity, for instance, that is executed by the same people in this department and it takes more than 30 days, we can flag it. And you can do that with one, but you can actually do that with 100 different rules if you want to. So let's go to an example. Let's say I have an SLA violation tag where I say this step in this process can only take about 20 minutes to act, or cannot exceed 30 days of execution. Once I deliver that tag, I can really filter on it. I can visualize it, but I can see over time if it's getting worse or it's getting better. But because I tagged it, it's immediately now a filter for me as well. So I could just click on it, and then all my cases in my entire system are all filtered on that SLA violation. And if I would then go, for instance, to my timing dashboard again, I will spot very quickly where my problem is, because if I have a restriction of 30 days and this takes now in 15 days and this one takes 16 days, I know where my problem already is.